Well, this is your host, Scott Roos, and I am speaking to you from the North Saskatchewan River, right here in scenic Prince Albert, Saskatchewan, with the one and only phenom of the Yukon. I am talking to Diyet, who has a wonderful band called Diyet and the Love Soldiers today. And of course, the big news is on April 7th, you will be traveling to the wonderful E.A. Rawlinson Center for the Arts to put on a very special concert. And I'm sure everyone here in Prince Albert is looking forward to, your northern charm.
Awesome. Well, I am really excited to get to Prince Albert. I have been one other time, non-music related, and that was that was an adventure getting there. Although I didn't get to stay very long.
Now, from what I understand, you live in a smaller community, maybe a little north of Whitehorse, Yukon. Is that kind of where you're at right now, Diet?
Yeah, yeah. My family and we live um, in our traditional territory, which is about well, in the winter right now with these roads, about 3 hours northwest of Whitehorse. We're
Right.
along the Alaska Highway, like 2 hours from the Alaska border.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, um, my family has been here for I don't know many many decades and hundreds of years.
Right. Well, now tell me about that. I mean, you grew up in the north and you grew up in a bit more of a traditional community to start, and then you came down to Whitehorse. Is that how that worked?
Well, I've actually never lived in Whitehorse. Um, I grew up. I was like really born raised in the bush in my community. It just really traditional life. But my dad is not First Nation, so he is, and he originally came from coming out from Ontario,
Uh huh.
um, but he brought with him this sort of into my life, anyways, so like a connection to other music and he's also a musician. And I guess that's been really just really prevalent in my life. There's always, even though we lived literally in a one room cabin, very isolated on across what we call across the lake, across the Colony Lake from the village.
Uh huh.
Um, and but we also had this, growing up in that life, we also had access to a shortwave radio, which allowed me and made an impression on me as a very small child to hear music and voices and sounds from other parts of the world, and it just sort of sparked that curiosity in me to discover that, and the music um, has always been that real undercurrent of um, I'm not sure how I'd put that, but sort of like it's always been a driving factor, I guess, in what it is I do and explore.
Right. Right.
But the funny thing about the whole situation is I went out into the world, and wanted to be, like every kid with a music dream wants to be a star. But the funny thing is I ended up coming back home
Yeah. Yeah.
and actually having a career living at home in the Yukon in this tiny little community and raising my own family here. Um, and it's funny how that life works that way, but it seems that it does.
I think sometimes when we don't overthink something, things kind of become simpler.
They do, yeah, and it's what what you're comfortable with as you get older too. I noticed, you know, as I as I got older and maybe more mature, maybe not. um, and just started to have these had life experiences that I could fall back on or just draw from. What you really start to see is that the way that you can put all those experiences into perspective is sometimes just to go back to where you're most comfortable.
That's right.
and and for me, that's home, that's here.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I was thinking now, like, you know, for people, for Southerners, quote unquote, that haven't experienced life north of 60. I mean, there is a different, distinctly unique flavor about this area of Canada, right? And I mean, I've never been to the Yukon, so I mean, I can't even speak to, what the way of life is north of 60 in the Yukon. But I mean, how would you characterize, your own personal experience, and then, how those experiences basically seep into the sound and music? Because having experienced a more distinctly northern sound in the Northwest Territories, I will say, like, that you cannot replicate what you do if you are from a distinctly southern background. Am I right?
I would agree. I think I don't know what it is about living up here, but because maybe it's because I truly don't know any different. Like it's such a part of my, I guess, my psyche and my being. Um, but what I really notice is because there's a lot of land, that feeling of maybe space and a connection to something that is way older than me as a human being can conceptualize in words, maybe, uh, can somehow come out in music in a way. And I think that space and that time allows you to write music and maybe perform in a way that's not hindered, by maybe by other experiences of more people and um, buildings, or just that noise, that extra noise. The one, and maybe a little example of that is when I was fresh out of university. So I went to university for music
Right.
performance,
Right.
and I finished. When I was finished, I I was lost for a little while because I didn't really know how to put that education into a career, because I came to realize that while I truly admired and that the way that, let's say, in quotes, Western musicians, have careers, that sort of traditional way of getting a career in music, and especially what I was studying classical voice, um, didn't jive with my own soul. um, and it was a real disappointment to me because that's sort of that was my fantasy of what music could be like and would be like for me. And then I went uh, I went to Europe for a year. I was in the Netherlands, with Robert, my soon-to-be husband at that point.
Right. Right.
um, and living there, I thought, wow, this is going to be like an awesome adventure. And maybe here in Europe, I will uh, find whatever it is that I was so intrigued by, all those years earlier. And there was so much noise that it I couldn't think and I couldn't be creative in that space. As try as I might, I it was so foreign to me.
Yeah.
Uh, and I realized very quickly that, at that point in my life, I was really young too, that I didn't really know, how what to make of that and how to quiet that noise. Um, so I came home when we eventually moved back to the Yukon, and moved back to my community of Burwash Landing. Um, it was the first time actually in my entire life that I was able to write truly what I was thinking about, um, not be hindered by all the other voices and all the other noise that was happening.
Yeah.
And
I was just gonna say,
yeah,
then the Netherlands is a very, unique place. I mean, it's of course, known to be very accepting of a wide swath of different, viewpoints and values and so on and so forth. But it is very, if you go into those major centers like Amsterdam, for instance, and you're from a very very small, quote unquote rural-ish background, I could see it being overwhelming for sure.
yeah, for sure. It's incredible. I mean, it's incredible. in that the experience is incredible, and everything like around you is new and exciting. And it's about that noise. Sometimes if you're not born into that noise,
Yeah,
you can never get used to it, and it's never calming. And then whenever we go back, we go back to Europe quite often because my Robert's family still lives there.
that's right. Yeah.
Um, we it's a great, if you go there thinking, going there with this idea of just absorbing the atmosphere and the life and everything, it's a great vacation. But if you start to put yourself into that situation, like as maybe a permanent one, um, there's a whole bunch of thoughts that go through my mind anyway, going like, oh God, can I actually ever live here again? Can I, I don't know. Um, it's just so foreign, I guess, to
Yeah.
this, to I'm just going to say this, to this landscape that I really am from, which is, it's magnetic rock and ice and water and um, really big skies and very few people.
Yeah. No. I mean, I would agree. I mean, even living in Yellowknife for as long as I did, it was fascinating when people would come down from the Arctic, for instance, and Yellowknife would be considered the big city because I mean, if you even head a little bit further south to Edmonton, I mean, how are the people, the indigenous people from the Arctic going to handle such a giant, city-like environment? I would imagine.
It's always culture shock. Like even, I've been very fortunate to travel and see a lot of different places and lots of big cities, and it still takes it. Like literally, if I go to Edmonton, it takes me a day or two just to like get my bearings and be like, oh yeah, I like this town.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Well, now I was thinking, in terms of your own indigenous background, I mean, I've always felt, and I mean, please don't, maybe this is misplaced and maybe it's not, but I've always felt that, when you head north, that the north feels, now that I've lived down south for a little bit over a year again after coming from the north, it feels like they're a little bit more ahead in reconciliation. I mean, is this an accurate, characterization, or, have you experienced other things?
Sorry, do you meaning that the North is a little bit ahead in reconciliation or the
Yes,
South?
yes. Sorry, yeah, I mean
Okay,
the north, yeah.
okay. Interesting. Yeah, that, I mean, we could have an hours long conversation about that.
Fair.
What I what I what I understand, and I guess I can only speak from my own personal experience and what I know is the North is a bit, and I'll talk from the Yukon perspective, um, is a little bit unique in as far as the rest of this country goes. And perhaps it's because, like let's say the colonization of indigenous communities in Canada, that the Yukon is really sort of like one of the last places, right, where people really settled here.
Yeah.
Um, and maybe because of that, maybe not. I don't know what the circumstances, the circumstances sort of led us to 2020. But what I've noticed in my lifetime, and what I've noticed from my relationship with my own family, is that people were aware before, like something like even the word land claims, or even the people were aware here that in order to maintain that maintain our our autonomy in some ways, that we would have to at some point in the very near future be willing to fight really hard for our land and not give that up. There are no modern, like there are no like land treaties as we know them in the South as far as reservations go.
Yeah.
In the Yukon, the leaders at the time, from like the 50s, like that's sort of when the Indian affairs sort of really made a big presence in the Yukon. um, the leaders at that time they really understood that they would not sign anything blindly, um, and they realized and they believed that they had a lot of rights, and maybe it's also because of the population here is so sparse, but there were all these factors that sort of came into place, and because of that history, we have what is like a modern land claim, modern treaty agreement, which is based on self-governance. And that idea of self-governance, even though in many, there's lots of critics for and against it, but even if you look at all those, the critiques of modern treaty agreements, for me the main difference is that I was born at a time when land claims was really starting to be implemented, and people were really actively pursuing this, and they were not going to back down, and they were not going to be bullied either into a corner. Right. Because of that, my worldview, my perspective comes from that, and so I see it as, I see it as just this is life. This is our life here. We are modern day stewards of our traditional lands, and we have a real duty to protect those lands as best as we can, and also to protect our people. And so having that kind of like view, just it sort of colors and changes the way that you think about your land. And we see this bubbling across this country now. Read any paper, read any like online news, thing across this country, that people are really waking up to this. And it's not about this is mine and that's yours. It's not about that. It's about this is ours, but it's not mine in that ownership sense of, I bought it, so it's mine and you can't take it from me. Uh-huh. It's more like this is our great responsibility. And so when I think about reconciliation, I flip-flop on this day to day, to be quite honest with you, because for me, reconciliation is about reconciling what is wrong. And some days I want to just focus on what we've done right, and bring people onto that side of this is what we have done right, and this is what is working, and let's build upon what works. And then some days I wake up and I say, it's really hard to get over the things that were done wrong. And how do you make that better? It's such a difficult and long discussion, but it's necessary. And I think how people express that is going to continue to evolve and change for a long time to come. Well, but it's changing, and that's the best part, is when people get, when everybody gets their hairs up, that means something's happening that's right, because it means that people are starting to think. And when you can think for yourself, it means that there's change that's going to happen.
Yeah. Well, given your mindset from the Yukon, when you come into places like Prince Albert, I mean, how do you, see yourself in terms of sharing your own unique vision as an artist and, as an Indigenous person?
It's, I've been very fortunate to be able to travel to many places in Canada and outside of Canada into Indigenous community and remote communities as well. And there is really not very much in this music business that gives me the greatest pleasure as doing that, because we're just all really looking for, for connection. And going into communities where the relationships between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people are, fractured, or they're worn out, or they're tense. Sometimes just being in place, in those communities, and sharing what it is, what little I can offer. I can't offer a lot, but what little I can offer from my own perspective can sometimes just be enough to give somebody a different perspective. And on both, from both camps, let's say, call them camps. I don't know if I want to do that, but
Yeah.
some of the best things for me about this business that I'm in is I love going into Indigenous community, and I love sharing what I can, and inspiring or offering, especially young people, a little bit more hope in their own situation.
Yeah.
But then I love going into that same day. Usually, I can, in the evening, I'll go into the theater
That's
where
right.
not very many Indigenous people are comfortable going, let's be honest. And I go into the theater, and I can share my story and some of my, in my music, and also offer that audience another perspective. And the way that I was raised and taught is that when we teach lessons, we teach them as kind and gently as we can. And sometimes that kindness and gentle approach to learning is, in the right situations, can help people to help people to soften some of the the hard edges that we build up over time and through experience. And so I think for me, music has done that for me in my life. It has softened some of my hard edges in some places, and sometimes it's honed those edges as well.
Yeah.
So that's really the gift of all of this. Is just that. It's music and art is really, it's about offering people another perspective, and how people respond to that is really up to them. But for me to have that experience, being able to the opportunity, I'm really profoundly grateful for it, because as much as it might, me coming into a very, let's say, remote, isolated, hurt community, what that might do for other people, it also is equal. That healing and that sharing is also reciprocal for me.
Yeah.
So I get just as much out as everybody else.
That's definitely a great way of looking at it. I mean, you did mention the whole theater perspective, and I know you guys are a three-piece, and your press release says that you're as comfortable in a theater as you are in a small venue. So, I mean, what steps do you take to prepare for something as large and acoustically rich as the E.A. Rawlinson Center for the Arts?
Well, I guess in one side, my when we go into a nice big theater, a beautiful theater, a place that has all that it can offer as far as making you, to amplify you in the best ways. That is actually kind of like a rare gem, because most of the times, like when we play, people, musicians, we play everywhere in all kinds of situations. When you can come into a nice theater and just sound really good, the work that has to go into that before you sound good is a lot too. You have to make sure that you know what you're doing. You have your craft. You're honing your craft all the time. And for me, I am not a rehearsed performer, and I'll just put that out there. And what I mean by that is I don't necessarily practice my stage banter, or, I do practice my instruments and I do practice, my craft.
Yeah, of course.
But I don't, for me, it's really about that connection that you have immediately with your audience. And I've never, sometimes you get audiences that are harder to connect with than others, but everybody wants to connect. So you like, and my job is to find out where that opening is. Um, and so what my goal is when I come into a really, nice room, people are excited to be there. They've purchased a ticket to be there. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
they want to be there. They want to be impacted in some way. And so my job as not only a performer, but as a storyteller and as somebody who, shares some of their art with somebody else is that I am as real and as authentic as I can be. And part of that, it maybe is just also showing some vulnerability, which is hard for everybody to do. But I find in that moment when you are in that relationship of, on a stage in a venue where people are there to specifically hear you, that you can't be afraid to be vulnerable.
That's a good way of looking at it for sure. Um, One of the things that I like to do on Down to the River is I like to talk about, at least one or two songs by an artist. So I mean, you put out a record in 2018. I think it was a self-titled called Diyet and the Love Soldiers.
Hmm.
One of the songs that really strikes me and really speaks to that whole northern experience that we keep going back to is In Our Nature. I mean, what can you tell me about that track in particular?
That track is really, if it's really hard to describe unless you've been to this region of the Yukon. It's hard to describe what it's like here. But if I can, put it into really plain words, it's really tall mountains. We're quite high in elevation. These are new mountains as far as mountains go. So they're nice and they're tall and jaggedy, and um, there's lots behind. There's glaciers and ice fields, and this sort of subarctic alpine um, forest, boreal forest. It's it is so magnificent and so stunning that um, you don't. Many people don't even realize that this is part of this country. Like people are enamored with the Rocky Mountains in Vancouver in British Columbia, sorry, and in Alberta.
Right.
This is something different. This is like, um, this is like Big Brother. um, Everything here seems so magnified sometimes for me. And I think it is the same for people who come to visit this place too, is in many ways you are forced to accept the fact that as one single human being, which we think we have so much control over our lives, is when you are here and you are out there, you are not in control. And it's a really good lesson I think everybody needs to learn, is to sometimes step back and say, actually, you have no control. When you step out of the boundaries of that protective, like town or city or car, and you go out into the wilderness, it's wild. And you're not at the top of the food chain. And so this song, In Our Nature, when I wrote that, it sort of came in a few waves, the inspiration for the song. One was when I was driving home, and my drive home, there's one point on it where you crest a summit and you come down and you can see Killarney Lake for the first time. And then you see these big mountains that sort of, you actually, the road seems like it runs into the mountain.
Uh-huh.
And it's my favorite spot on this whole Alaska highway. It's really awe-inspiring. And then another part of this song was inspired going out onto the middle of the lake in winter, and it's dark. And this sky is so big. It's so like bright, and you can see part of the Milky Way with your naked eye. it's incredible. And but then being out on that ice, as beautiful and calm as it is, the ice is constantly shifting, moving, cracking. And you know that there's like this other force right beneath you that is in complete control. And so, all having those experiences when I wanted to write the song, I just kind of wanted to create this maybe a visual picture of the gentleness and like this really beautiful experience, but also that you just have no control over how that unfolds.
Yeah. That's a good way of putting it. I mean, it really still does feel like the frontier when you go up north. There's just so much space. Like, there's
Yeah.
in the Northwest Territories, for instance, I mean, it's sort of part of the Canadian Shield, so there's so many lakes now. If you were to go down south where all those lakes were, of course, the entire shoreline would be dotted with cottages. But when you come up north, it's kind of like there's nothing. It's just you a lot of the times in the lake, or thinking about that drive up, the highway. There's a number of waterfalls going into the north. I'm speaking from my own northern experience, of course. And
Yeah.
you go, and now here's a waterfall that's as high as Niagara, but not as wide. And you can walk right up, and there's nobody a lot of the times, maybe two or three other people there with you, and you experience the sheer awe-inspiring force of nature that, you'd maybe, if you went to Niagara Falls, for instance, there would be thousands of people, but, you go to north of 60 and there's maybe a couple other people, and that's it, right?
Yeah, and it's as beautiful as it is, it's pretty scary, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like there's a feeling of like yeah, you really surrender your what you believe, you surrender your power, or you surrender what your control. Um,
Yeah.
and I think I find it's exhilarating, but it's also it's it's just these are good lessons. They're good lessons for us as human beings.
Yeah, it's unbridled, nature, right? I mean, there's no guardrail. It's like there
That's
it
right.
is, there it is. You can choose to get close or enjoy from afar, but there's nothing that's going to keep you from getting close if you really really wanted to.
If you really want to, that's right.
And I think that kind of characterizes the whole northern experience. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't mention, because I mean, this is, pretty much, in the last 24 hours, of course, the Arctic Winter Games has decided that it's not going to run, and of course, it was slated to happen in the Yukon. I mean, did you
Yeah.
have any of the cultural performances? Were you guys slated to play there?
No, we weren't. We unfortunately didn't work out with our timing for being on the road.
Right.
Um, but I know almost everybody that was slated to play, and I actually hope they still have a big party and get all these people to play for the community.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I mean, you can understand, the intention and the desire to keep people safe. Absolutely. And then
Yeah.
on the flip side of that, there's just such, there's lots of heartbroken kids around the Circuit Bowl and North, and their coaches and volunteers and teachers and parents, and people who put so much time and effort into, and for many, once in a lifetime experience. Um, so you really, I am so glad that I was not had to be part of that decision, because that's a really heartbreaking one to make.
Yeah, yeah. Well, of course, I'm still seeing, posts on social media from people that had kids that were going to be going, that were part of, the curling team, or this team or that team. And of course, the Arctic Winter Games, being as it is, also has a strong Indigenous games element that really,
Yes.
it's the one time of the year where maybe there's a bit of a spotlight shined on Indigenous games and things of that nature. So, did you know Daniel Ashley that wrote the Bring It North Arctic Winter Games theme song?
Yeah, absolutely. Do know him, and the Dakoquan, and it's such a, yeah. I hope they actually just put that out there anyways. I really do, because it's great. It's like, yeah, it's a great anthem.
Yeah, yeah. I was just listening to it today, and of course, the song is called bring it north, and you can find it actually on the Arctic Winter Games website, and it really truly encapsulates a lot of the culture that would have been present in Whitehorse. I guess in another week, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it was slated to happen March 15th, and like you said, there was a honest and genuine feeling from the organizers for the safety of the athletes and the people participating. But there's that whole other aspect of letdown and disappointment from the people that were actually going to be there and participate, whether it be an athlete or an artist or even just a volunteer.
Yeah, that's right. And you know, um, I don't know that there's anything you can do to remedy any of that, but I do hope that that there's some kind of a party or something, a celebration that can happen, even if it's just a cultural one.
Yeah.
Definitely all the schools in the Yukon uh, uh, have like they all of the spring breaks and all of the schools are timed for the Arctic Winter Games, so people can participate.
Yeah, it's the same in the
And
Northwest Territories as well.
yeah. I did read a funny post from a parent that said, "Oh no, what am I going to do for 2 weeks?"
Yeah, exactly. Well, now there's another thing too. The difference between the North and the South, of course, is that, the spring break a lot of the times is 2 weeks instead of one. Like here in Saskatchewan, we get a February break and we get an April break. But, a lot of the times in Saskatchewan, that break is 2 weeks for a wide variety of reasons. But I mean, part of it is the timeline of the Arctic Winter Games. And if the kids and the athletes aren't going to be in school anyway, you might as well not, like kind of, they have to cater to this wonderful event that takes place. And, unfortunately, I've never actually gotten to experience myself in the entire time that I was living in Yellowknife. I think it was there one time. And my contribution was I helped move bunk beds into St. Pat's High School. That was it. And I saw 400 high school students be, voluntold that they had to do the same thing.
That's awesome.
Yeah, well, but I mean, that's how much the community though has to rally and get together around this event, and it's definitely an
Oh
important
yeah.
event for the North. So disappointment but understanding, I guess, seems to be the vibe that you both, yourself as an artist and myself as Northwest Territories expat, we're sort of generating that vibe together right now, I suppose.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right.
Well, listen, Diyet, I don't want to keep you much longer, but I've definitely appreciated your time. You're so well spoken. You're such you're a person wise beyond your years. So definitely thanks for coming down to the river with me today and having this chat.
Well, thank you for thinking about me. I really do appreciate it, Scott.
Right on. Well, we'll see you in a couple of weeks, April 7th at the E.A. Rawlinson Center for the Arts. Diyet and the Love Soldiers will be bringing their northern experience to us southern folks, and it's going to be a can't-miss concert. I would sincerely encourage anybody that's listening to this or that will read my article on Diyet that you have to go to this. You will not see a performer like this at the E.A. Rawlinson Center all year. I mean, the northern experience is just that unique.
Awesome.
Well, you have a good day, Diyet. Thanks again.
Thank you. Take
Okay.
care.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Bye.